Alright, in this video I want to take a look at the political situations in several countries, including Germany. And after the federal elections, we haven't had much election-wise in Germany and won't be having much for several months. However, there's some other big elections occurring and I want to cover those. But we do have some major news out of Germany today, which is that the Bundestag passed a reform proposal to change the constitution for budget reasons. Now, the German constitution prevents Germany from going into debt and has limit restrictions on the budget in the country. And the CDU, CSU, and the SPD wanted to amend this. They wanted to allow for the country to go into debt in certain areas. They wanted to be able to invest more money than previously possible in certain areas, especially defense. In military spending. However, since there was the debt break in the country, they could not do this, and they wanted to change this. However, since this is a constitutional law, they needed a two-thirds majority, and since the AfD and Die Linke were against it, that means that the new Bundestag, which was recently elected, did not have a majority to push through this bill. So what ended up happening was that the CDU and the SPD called for a special session of the old Bundestag, the Bundestag which is now pretty much out of office. And in the final week of the lame duck period of the previous Bundestag, they held a special session, which of course was this week, and the Bundestag passed it in a two-thirds majority with the CDU, the SPD, and the Greens voting for it. And what this means is that certain areas of the country, they are going to be able to invest more money than previously were able to, especially defense. They're going to be able to maybe go into more debt in order to increase defense spending or infrastructure spending than they previously were allowed to because of the constitutional limits. Now, of course, if we take a look at how different parties voted, the SPD, the Greens, and the CDU, CSU factions almost all voted together, and that gave them a two-thirds majority. Now, these three parties have a majority in the old Bundestag and the new Bundestag, but they do not have a majority in the new Bundestag. And Die Linke and the AfD together have what is called the Sperrminorität, which means they have over a third of the seats in the Bundestag, which means that any constitutional laws require at least some votes from Die Linke or the AfD. And since both parties were against it, a majority, a supermajority, a two-thirds majority from the SPD, the CDU, and the Greens was not possible, and so that's why they needed to have this special session of the old Bundestag before it was, before the new Bundestag comes into office next week. In order to get this law passed. And we see pretty much a vote along party lines. The SPD, the CDU, the Greens voted for it. The FDP, the AfD, the BSV group, and Die Linke's group voted against it. Now, this would not have been possible in the new Bundestag, and of course, this was very heavily criticized because the elections had already occurred. We already had a new Bundestag, and it was a few weeks away from it being sworn in and having its first plenary session. And this is something that has happened before, where you have special sessions of Bundestags in the lame duck period. However, it was seen as somewhat controversial because they were doing it with a majority that had effectively lost its majority with a political camp which had lost some support, and with this, would not be possible. And so some people were saying that, the German voters would not have wanted this because, the German voters did not vote for a two-thirds majority for these parties. And of course, Die Linke and the AfD did challenge it both, in the media and I believe also in the courts. But the, Constitutional Court did allow this special session to go through, and we do have the reforms. And this means that the new government of the SPD and the CDU, which will likely be the new government, there is coalition talks right now between Friedrich Merz's CDU and the SPD, we will most likely have a grand coalition. And what this reform means is they will be able to spend more money, going into debt in certain areas which they were not previously able to do, like I said, mostly on defense. But that's going to be, the update for Germany. This is, of course, a major event. And, of course, next week we will have the new Bundestag, so this will be the last vote, the last, plenary session of the old Bundestag, which existed from 2021 to 2025. And in the next few days, we will have the new one, which was elected, around a month ago. And, of course, we will likely have the new government very shortly. The coalition talks are, of course, going okay for the CDU, CSU, and the SPD. Of course, they still have to work out things. There are different parties. There is somewhat tension there between Friedrich Merz's migration bill. But overall, the parties have worked together in the past. And I believe that, eventually they will come to a formal agreement. Of course, we will have Friedrich Merz be chancellor ruling with the SPD. Now, also in regards to coalition talks, we have a development of Austria. This actually happened a few weeks ago, but I haven't covered it on this channel, and that is that the coalition talks between the Freedom Party and the People's Party had failed, and there has been a new coalition formed between the Austrian People's Party, the Austrian Social Democratic Party, and the Liberal Neos Party. And so effectively this is a the equivalent of the Germany or the Weimar coalition in Germany, where you have the center right, the center left, and the center party all forming a one coalition. They have a majority. Now, what's significant about this is, of course, the Freedom Party of Austria won the election. They came first place with around 28% back in November or September of 2024, and so they effectively had the mandate to form a government. And initially, the Austrian People's Party wasn't working with them. However, after their failure to form a coalition and the resignation of the chancellor, they opened up to coalition talks, and we had coalition talks between Herbert Kickel's FPÖ and the OVP, and many people expected Herbert Kickel to become the next chancellor of Austria, which is very significant because the Freedom Party has never been able to hold that position. They've held the vice chancellorship twice, but never the actual chancellorship. However, it looks like that is not going to happen. We have a new coalition with the Austrian People's Party remaining in power with in a three-party coalition with the Social Democrats and the Liberal Neos Party. Now, of course, how stable this coalition is yet to be seen. I believe that they do have a somewhat of a solid majority, especially when they're including the third party. However, we will have to see if there's going to be earlier snap elections. Of course, the Austrian Freedom Party, they are the biggest party in the Austrian National Council, and they will form a very strong opposition. And they also have performed very well in state elections. So we could see that the Freedom Party, even though they won this election, if they remain in the opposition, they could get even stronger and they could win repeated state elections. They won the elections in Steiermark with around 35%, a huge landslide victory. And so even if the Freedom Party doesn't come to power, we could see them actually growing even stronger, being off the fact that they're in the opposition and the kind of establishment parties growing weaker. But we will have to see. And, of course, once we get closer to some of the other Austrian state elections, I will definitely make sure to cover those on the channel. But I want to give this update about the situation in Austria. Now, lastly, I want to take a look at two elections that we're going to be focusing on. Now, Germany's not going to have another state election for a while. It'll have some local elections. But the two big elections in Europe right now, I believe, are the Romanian and Polish presidential elections. Both are going to occur in May of this year, so around 2 months from now. Now, the biggest situation in Romania was, of course, that the constitutional courts barred Călin Georgescu from running. Călin Georgescu won the first round of the Romanian presidential elections back last year in kind of out of nowhere. He was at 5% in the polls and ended up getting 22%, coming first place. And, of course, the constitutional courts canceled the second round, and they annulled the results of the first round and rescheduled it for May. And the polls were actually showing Călin Georgescu, which won the original first round, at around 45%. He was the clear favorite, not only in the first round, but in the second round. But recently, over a week ago, the Constitutional Court said that Călin Georgescu cannot run. He is barred from running in this election, and that really changes everything because Georgescu was, expected to be able to win this election, at least according to polls. Now with Georgescu out of it, it looks like a lot of his voters are going to go to George Simeon from the Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, which is politically similar to him, but of course Simeon is nowhere near as strong as Georgescu. He is polling in first place for the first round of the election, just like Georgescu was, but when it comes to the runoff, the second round, some of the various candidates are able to beat Simeon. We have, I believe, the mayor of Bucharest, and of course a former politician from some of these establishment parties. Now, the polls for the first round in the previous election that happened in 2024 were very unreliable. All the numbers were completely off, so I'm not sure how reliable the polls are now. We will definitely have to see, but of course we will have a new first round and a new second round. But this is going to be very interesting because this is kind of an unprecedented event with Georgescu being barred from running as the front runner in the election. We will have to see, and I expect George Simeon to make it to the first round, either winning first or second place. But then we have Dan from I believe who's the mayor of Warsaw, and then some other candidates. Now, Lasconi, who made it to the second round with Georgescu, has kind of tanked in the polls. It seems like they're trying to have a complete reset of this election, and both the candidates will probably not be involved. You have some candidates who ran in the first round who are withdrawing, and of course some candidates who were not in the original election who are running now. And so we have a basically completely different field of candidates. But I will do another video on this as we get probably in the next few weeks, covering more in depth the different candidates and looking at the polls more closely. But I just wanted to give this general overview of the situation in the country. And lastly, of course, we're going to talk about Poland. Now, Poland is also interesting because we have a development in the country. Now, the Polish presidential elections are very important because Poland's president, of course, has some veto power. And in Poland, we had the elections in 2023 where the Law and Justice Party on the right lost power. It lost its majority and was replaced by a centrist coalition led by the Civic Platform of Donald Tusk. Now, this coalition has a majority in the Polish parliament, but the president of Poland is still Andrzej Duda from the Law and Justice Party, which means that there is still a split in the power. You have the prime minister from the Civic Platform bloc, and then you have the president from the Law and Justice Party. So this election is very important because if the Civic platform is able to win with their candidate, then they will be able to have full power in Poland. Whereas if the Law and Justice Party is able to hold the presidency for a third consecutive term, they will continue to have veto power and be able to at least weaken the kind of centrist coalition in Warsaw. Now, the Law and Justice Party's candidate, Andrzej Duda, from the previous two elections, of course, is term limited. He will not be able to run, and so they have nominated a man, Karol Nawrocki, who is a historian who is independent but is being supported by the Law and Justice Party. So he's not an official party member, but he is supported by the party. Now, he is doing okay in the polls. He is polling at least in second place and expecting to make it into the second round as of now. Of course, the Law and Justice Party and the Civic Platform have been the main parties in Polish politics. However, he is far below Rafael Trzaskowski of the Polish Civic Platform, who is the mayor of Warsaw, who is polling in first place. But what's very interesting is that the Confederation Party on the right has their candidate Mencen, who is polling in third place, but has actually surged over the past several days and weeks. And it is very possible that Mencen could actually overtake Nawrocki and win second place and go into the runoff against Trzaskowski of the mayor of Warsaw. And so it is very likely that the Civic Platform's candidate will win the first round and have a very good chance of winning the second round. But the question is now of who he will go against. Is it going to be the candidate of the Civic Platform, or the Law and Justice Party on the right, or the Confederation Party? Both are right wing, but some are right wing in different ways. The Law and Justice Party has a more older voting base. They are very right wing nationalistic, but have a more tolerance towards social welfare programs. The Confederation Party has a lot of more Catholic nationalists, has libertarians. It's kind of a mix of different political blocks. I believe it's like 3 or 4 political parties. You have some very religious Catholic groups. You also have some libertarian groups in there, and a decent mix of people on the right. And so, of course, it's debatable which one's more right wing, but they are both right wing political parties. Confederation does appeal to more younger voters. Law and Justice appeals to more older voters. And now in the polls, actually, for the second round, some polls are showing that Mencen has a slightly better chance at beating the Civic Platform candidate than Nawrocki does from the Law and Justice Party. So it is going to be very important who makes it in the second round and who's able to go against Trzaskowski from the Civic Platform. But of course, as we get closer, we have to see. We could see the surge for Mencen kind of fall down, and we could see a conventional two-way race between Law and Justice and Civic Platform. But as of now, we're going to have that's the way it's going to be now. But if we see Mencen continue to surge, he could end up overtaking Nawrocki and winning second place, and of course that means he will go into the runoff. And Mencen winning the presidential election is of course a long shot from here, but that would be a huge development in Polish politics. That would shake up the political system, because that would mean there's a third political bloc. Because even though Confederation and Law and Justice are both right-wing parties, they have a lot of differences with each other. And if Confederation is able to win a presidential election or even make it into the second round, that means that Law and Justice has lost its kind of monopoly on the Polish right, and we could see kind of a collapse of this two-party system that's existed in Polish politics for the past several years. But that's going to be it for this, and of course, like I said, once we get closer, I will do more in-depth video on the Polish elections, looking at the different candidates, and of course, the Polish names are some of the hardest to pronounce, so I'm sure I'll get some corrections on these. But that's going to be it for this video. I wanted to give an overview of Germany, and of course, to kind of an outlook of these two elections, and these are going to be the ones that we're going to be covering over the next several weeks. But that's going to be it for this video, so if you do like it, please do like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.